Kathleen, thank you so much for being on the show and being willing to share your go-to-market insights and wisdom. How are you?
Oh, I am. I'm good today. I'm in the backyard today for those who are joining in via YouTube because there's a remodel going in my house that just got really loud about 10 minutes ago. So, so is life. So as long as it doesn't start raining here, I'm good. But no, it's honor. It's great to be on this podcast. I've been listening to the Go to Market Pack for a while off and on. So I appreciate you allowing me to join. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, I know you have a awesome show that my co-founder has been on as well. Maybe we
Yeah.
can touch on that here in a bit. But real quick, why don't you just tell folks a little bit about your awesome background and how did you get into now being an expert in helping organizations with their go-to-market motion?
Yeah, in short, by accident, but, by accident, I think I found my happy spot. So, I actually started at Deloitte as a consultant, and I was doing cybersecurity audits, and I was doing Sarbanes-Oxley audits, like, really boring IT audit stuff, and a long time ago, somebody came to me and said, "Hey, there's this software platform that makes your work more efficient as an auditor," and I said, "Great." So, I started to become a sales engineer. So I did demos of the product and I started to be exposed to the reseller world and how software works. And so that was a long time ago. So like 22 years ago. So I've been in enterprise software ever since. But through that, I've had have different roles. So I've lived the life of a sales engineer. I've lived the life of an enterprise sales rep in the field holding a bag, selling to anything from regional banks all the way to very name brand Fortune 500, Fortune 200 companies. And I took that and started to do strategic product marketing underneath Dell at the time. So had a little bit of a different stint as it relates to my career, which then parlayed me into a general manager position at a startup and going to big box ServiceNow, in which I was leading a enterprise sales team as well for Central and Western United States. And then most recently went back to a company to run their Americas business. So without saying numbers, but private that spun out from Dell, and it is a company that is private equity backed, which is a different type of experience for all those of you listening who have learned that world. And mid market, it's a 3-digit millions kind of market leader, if you will. So running that and doing a sales transformation, cultural transformation from a leadership role was also very different. Had about 50 sales reps underneath me, and kind of indirectly had sales engineers and inside sales too as well. So I would say I'm a little bit different of a specialist in that I appreciate product. I have bird dog the consulting, the implementation part, but I've got wired into me, what a marketer typically does in terms of market analysis. But I've also very much coming to this industry from a sales execution perspective, and I think it's typically hard to get all those three things into one shot. I like to think strategically, but with all things startup, you have to be able to execute. And so that kind of really brought me to my happy place this year, in which I went on my own. And specifically, I'm loving the life of being able to help early stage to kind of Series B-ish companies that are in the SaaS B2B space find the rhythm, so to speak. Lots of technical founders out there, lots of founders who might be on their third or fourth head of sales and not really sure what is wrong with the recipe that's not working. And so that's where I come in. So it's been a really fun run and something I've been really enjoying to frankly get away for a little bit from the corporate, bigger organizations that have some established tech and be able to do things new and groundbreaking with some really interesting category creation type of companies. So
Awesome. I couldn't help but think, wow, like the points that you've focused on throughout your career, like that experience with product marketing and sales and just that h- intersection of all that, all those insights really, I think, position you really well to run your own business. And that is a unicorn. So that, thanks for sharing that. I wanted to ask you regarding the enterprise space, like when you think about qualifying an enterprise deal, how do you do that? Like, what advice would you give folks out there around that? And then I wanted to dive into your bookend framework that I think is super interesting.
Yeah, that was fun when we had that conversation and talked about that. So, enterprise sales, and for those of you listening who've been in sales for a while, my answer now is different than what I would have given you 5, 10 years ago, because in short, enterprise sales is so much more challenging with a sea of technology companies that are really, really good in their tech. So, what that means in enterprise sales is that it's really important when you qualify to think about your time as your most important, precious, and non-renewable commodity. And so, what that means in my mind is that when you do enterprise sales, you really need to be thinking about what is the value based outcome that you believe you can deliver to the customer. Is the customer, at least the ingredients, aligned to realize that outcome? So I think at its core, what I think about when you're qualifying is you got to get really tight as a sales rep. Let's just kind of go back to kind of who's doing the work as a sales rep, and what is the ideal customer that you're looking for that would be a great customer whenever you would win the business, and what are those must have elements versus the nice to have elements. And I think it's really important to ensure that you are calibrating to that. Now, in the startup world, it's not like you have leads typically coming left and right. So, it's very easy to say, be picky with your opportunities when you don't have 5x pipe. So, I get that and I've lived that. So, what I think about is in this stage when you qualify is kind of mentally putting them into two buckets. You've got a customer that's ripe, ripe for the picking, meaning it's checking all the boxes, everything's lining up. They have BANT, budget, authority, a budget to make the purchase, authority to make the purchase. Um, they've gotten the need, and they have a timeline and time pressure to do it. And if you have that, then away you go and you are obviously qualified. Now, I think the harder piece that it happens, what I call happy ears effect for reps, is that it has some of those qualities. They're like, oh, I just need to work on them a little bit and bake them. That's absolutely fine. Put them in the cold prospect list, but meter your energy level to make sure that what your work at that point is to hopefully get to the people who are decision makers to start to create a business case. But other than that, I would not be spending a ton of cycles into customized demos or proof of concepts until you have engagement. So that's kind of how I think about qualifying without getting to specifics for each company. But I would say I'm a big proponent. If you listen to my podcast, if you know me, I'm a big proponent of the value selling methodology.
Mm.
So at the end of the day, the question is, yes, of course, you have to qualify technical fit, but are they actually seeking the outcomes? There's a lot of widgets that I could buy that would help my life, but is the outcome that I'm going to get from that enough where I'm going to put my money to it? That's really what our sales reps should be thinking about. Now, again, this is a competitive market. And if you're doing enterprise sales, I will refute all of those people who say you don't have to do enterprise sales in person. At the end of the day, people buy from people. So what I refer to as kind of my bookend methodology is that if you are able to qualify and you're smelling blood, perhaps you don't have full band, but you're talking to the economic buyer, you can sense that you just need to be able to expand the business or outline the business case with the values, and you can hook onto it. So it's worth it. I think at the end of the day, that the way that I think about my time as I do with what I call the bookend philosophy, which is if you can establish a relationship where in those early days go face to face, then you do kind of the middle of it where you're doing demos and lots of meetings in Zoom. And then when it's time to do the dog and pony presentation, that's their final for the executive buyers or the board of directors or whoever, it's a sign off. And then you're doing negotiation and go back in person. So that's kind of how I maximize the time. So obviously, if you're going to do it that way at the beginning of that bookend, you might make sure that your trip has 3 or 4 or 5 meetings all at once. But that's the other compliment sandwich I would say to this, what could be a very specific methodology, kind of yes or no, pass, fail. But you have to also bring the human element to this, because part of this is being able in your qualification discussions to showcase that you also know something about solving their problem. And sometimes it's hard to convey not only your expertise, but also to convey your passion for it over Zoom. So that's kind of my thought around the bookends.
Yeah, I mean, I miss the in-person days a lot. I mean, it was just a lot of fun also, just
Yeah.
from a selfish perspective, to go in, bring some donuts, do the lunch and learns, all the, classic direct sales, and even like mid-market non-inside sales deals, right? Uh, we would go in because it just allowed us to actually, I think, as I reflect on it now, it allowed us to actually have more honest, more authentic interaction.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Like, I do think that inside sales is great. I've been an inside sales advocate for a long, long time, but there's just something about in person. I find that when we got into this remote first environment that we were, very much pushed into, or it's certainly
Yeah.
accelerated through the all the wild stuff that happened on Earth in the last couple of years. I observed that people just behave differently. Like, I think it's the video game type of sort of effect, in that you are like staring at yourself in a screen. There's a little bit of a dehumanization that happens a bit
Absolutely.
as well. That's my personal experience, right?
Yeah.
And I think that people find it easier to just speak to people differently. I don't want to say lie, or because that's not what I'm trying to get to, but just be, I think, a little more distant and a little more disconnected. And I just see that in every conversation that I have, even outside of sales specific conversations. So just wanted
Yeah.
to highlight something there.
That's a good point, and you kind of made me realize another maybe pro tip I'll give here is that qualification is not a one-time deal. So think of the qualification process as you get to know somebody, you're learning more and more at deeper, pulling off the layers of the onion as you go through. So, they've got this funny saying, always be closing. I call it always be qualifying, because just because you also heard the question, you got to keep asking it again, and then perhaps you're going to get a deeper, more robust, hey, I know you now type of answer. Just like human relationships, you're not going to go on a first date, which is many years ago, by the way. So shout out to my husband, but many years ago. But you're not going to go on a first date and just say your deep darkest secrets. And so you're going to have to draw that level of comfort. And so to your point in those SDR conversations, beginning conversations, you're just qualifying enough to get what I call BANT. So just enough to know that this is worth your time for a meeting, and the prospect is motivated to have that meeting.
Yeah.
But to your point, I just think, just my personal philosophy is, I just think people, they're multitasking on the phone. It's really hard to keep, I know all the tricks, whiteboards, can't say enough about them, but it's just hard sometimes to get somebody engaged. And I think most importantly, you're missing out on the hallway conversations. My belief about what happens in Zoom is you're there and your game face is on and you're plugging through the agenda. There's no small talk, you're kind of getting through it. But what you miss is the hallway conversation that's going to tell you really what's going on. And hey, did you know we had a reorg and this is how, John feels about it? And you need all of that. And you're just not going to develop that over a
Yeah.
Zoom. That's just, we time box meetings for a reason. So I think that organic relationship stuff. But I think to your point, in my opinion, and what I've seen is, although the one challenge is now teams are remote, so it's hard to actually create the right reason for an in-person meeting, because you'll get a lot, well, you could come here, but I'm only here and my team's all over the place. But at the end of the day, I would say people are starved for human connection.
Yeah.
But I will say, because people now are picky about where they spend their time, the best test is, if you have a qualified customer that is truly interested in you, is that they will come into the office to meet with you,
Yeah.
because now you're not going to get the meeting. It's very telling to me when I had my sales team, if they would say, hey, I can't get an on-site, like, it's very telling to me where the priority is and how much they see the value in that meeting, because it was valuable to them. They would make the time.
Yeah. It's like a qualifying variable. That
Yeah. Yeah. Which
makes you
never existed before, right? Because everybody's in
yeah.
the office. It's like, sure, you come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Buy us donuts,
Yeah, might
whatever.
as well. Yeah, so that's what I think is actually a really interesting type of indicator, soft indicator of kind of where you are and that customer's mentality.
This conversation's made me remember those in persons. So just to play it out real quick. So
Yeah,
you go to the office, there's a receptionist who like lets everyone know you're there.
yeah,
And then there's a little small talk, right? Like, your first impression actually can be, at least in my mind, the way I was trained was like the moment you introduce yourself
yeah,
in the reception area, right? And so there's that, and then there's a little small talk to the little meeting room,
yeah,
and then you do this meeting, and if that goes well, or you nail it, or you're charismatic and really are able to do that effectively, what I've observed and what I remember is then there's the post meeting walk back to
exactly.
reception, right?
That's
Those
what I
things
mean,
are
that
missing.
hallway. Yeah. Yeah, that's when you feel like the real juice. That's better
Totally,
than a
right?
real meeting,
Yeah,
right?
so it's like, oh, maybe there was no budget. Oh, we're tight on budget in the meeting or in the beginning, or maybe how prospects will be like, look, we're really tight on budget for this quarter. We might have something next quarter, but yeah, come in, we'll learn more. And then you nail the in person in the meeting room, and then you're walking back to the reception area, and they're like kind of like saying goodbye, and then they're like, you know what, hey, I think I found, I think I can find some budget, those sort of little things
Exactly,
that you talked about.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, my best, most recent story about that is this is a Fortune 20 company, and we were meeting with the executive, and everybody was remote, but me and the executive, everybody was dialing in. So I flew out to meet in this conversation, and as we're walking out, I kid you not, the woman talked to me for 1 hour. I almost didn't say anything. And basically, we created a deal. This was the beginning of probably end of Q3, and created one of the biggest deals of the quarter from that meeting, because she basically said, "Hey, this is my challenges with this group. This is what I'm trying to do." And I just kept asking questions, and we created an enterprise licensing, like an ELA out of it, which was just kind of incredible from that one conversation. So as I always say, sometimes you just have to show up.
Yeah.
And so I would say another kind of pro tip, although this is not a recruiting episode, is as you're looking for talent. I was just off the call; it's fresh on top of my mind. So I was just off the call with one of my founder clients, helping him get some job descriptions together. You've got to make sure that, if you're looking for someone who, let's say, plus or minus, has 4 to 5 years of sales experience, makes sense, pretty common. You actually should, if you know that you need to go in person because your deal is quite expensive and you need to write a big check and that requires face to face, you need to ask how many in person meetings your candidate has done. Because
Mhm.
think about this, they came into being whenever you didn't have to go in person. And I kid you not, we've had to do some trainings for those obviously really smart people, but just the logistics of, you typically stop, and if you're going to meet multiple of your team coworkers, make sure they're all on time, which means you have to meet them outside of send a meeting invite. You make me meet you 30 minutes outside of their office to go get a coffee and
Yeah.
pregame. You got to bring a little goodies into the meeting. You got to make sure you got the internet connection set up if you're doing a demo before you've organized that before. You let the customer sit down, you think about where you're going to sit. All those things are also the art of doing in person right. It's not just about making sure you've got your game face on and your hair's done and all those things, but it's also how you execute on that day to show your professionalism and to candidly to maximize your time there. So I think some of those things are a little bit of a lost art that, I mean, even just booking flight reservations and making sure that you get enough time. Like I have all the stories that there's really, really funny stories, but just be cognizant of that in terms of if you're looking for people, if you do want an in-person sale, it absolutely can be taught. It's not rocket science, but if you want somebody turnkey, you're going to need to understand if they're comfortable with that and they want to be able to travel. So
Wow, Kathleen, I just thought about the idea that we're going to probably have to do the in-person work training workshops for in-person meetings, right? So
yeah, I've run some of those trainings in the
yeah,
last year. So yeah, and then again, it's not to say anybody is not, it's just a skill it's a muscle we haven't trained for at the gym in the last 4 years.
totally. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of alignment, given that you've worked on the marketing side and understand product super well, but also sales and sales leadership, what advice would you give sales reps around developing strong alignment with their marketing uh, counterparts and making those like strategic requests?
Yeah. I would say, well, first off, if you're selling stuff, that's a good reputation to have. So let's just be clear. That helps you develop a relationship. So do your job and do your job well. Be known as the person who is collaborative and a team player. You want to make sure you've got a good reputation. So I think just that goes without saying. But I think more specifically, number one, I think as a sales rep, your homework before developing that relationship is to make sure you understand the domain and the product that you're selling. Now, why is that? Because when you make your request to the marketer, you need to come from that sense and that level of expertise. Then you combine that with your deep understanding of the prospect you're trying to sell to, or the campaign, the prospect's profile that you're trying to sell to. And ultimately, what a marketer needs is for you to come to them with a level of thoughtful insight. The worst request for them is, hey, I'm trying to run a campaign for hospital systems. What do you got? Like, you need, again, they're not the salespeople. So you need to kind of give them, hey, this is generally what I'm trying to achieve. This is what the challenges are. Like, spoon feed that to them, give them something to react to. But also, at the end of the day, think about this like a prospect. Spend time to get to know them. Number one, relationship. Again, great if you could break bread and take that person out to lunch because they don't get the love. But also, candidly, find a way to ask them how they're compensated, they're motivated. Are they bonus? Are they not? Like, how is this project going to make them look good? And if you can kind of draw that out of them and really play to that, I think that's important because that's a win-win situation. It advances them, which advances the need for them to keep doing the work that you're going to request. But I think ultimately it's also making sure you bring them along the journey and respecting their swim lane and yours. Your swim lane is you're the customer advocate, the prospect advocate, and you're there to deliver your best interpretation of what your asset needs to communicate in terms of value outcomes. What their swim lane is to be able to package that in a way that is pretty and succinct and lands the most effective need, right? You're not there to tell them what to put on the page, but you are there to be kind of the collaboration partner, if you will, and to proofread and to kind of take a look. And so make sure that you're owning this with them. You're not just throwing it across the fence. And then bring them along the journey. When you use the asset and you get good or negative feedback, let them know. The worst thing you can do to make sure they don't answer your next phone call when you need their help is not to pull them into the journey. If they see the asset is working, they get positive feedback, they're going to want to do it again. If they see that it's not, now they know what not to do and they can kind of help you the next time. So I think most importantly, just they're a team member, just like a
Yeah.
soccer team. You need to make sure that they're all working to a common goal, and they will be, but you got to develop that relationship and make sure that your asks are very purposeful and that they do result in success.
Relationships matter, folks. Let's not forget, like the top sales leaders and sales reps know that, right? So
Yeah.
it's not only is it good for you to hit your number and get things done, but it's good for the entire organization. Culture matters. But
Yeah.
that's just my little thing. Um,
100%.
speaking of assets, what are those critical assets that sales reps should use throughout an enterprise motion that maps to specific buyer stages or sales stages?
Yeah. I'll simplify in the context of three stages. Is one, your very early discovery stages where you're just trying to understand really is, you know that you can solve their problem, but you're just trying to qualify where the deal is and if this is a real deal to begin with, that you can start actively working on and move into kind of more aggressive sales tactics. So there's discovery. Then I'll kind of simplify into the middle stages where you're doing the demos, and basically you're getting them to win. You're getting to the point where they're saying, yes, I want your solution. So that's, let's call it, demo phase. And the last phase is proposals. They already know they want your solution. And now you're at the point where trying to construct what is the monetary aspect and the financial trade-off of them moving forward. So I think in the discovery phase, the most important thing is being brief, high impact, and making sure that the message resonates to that persona specifically. And what I mean by that is be cognizant in an enterprise deal. Typically, there might be one buyer who's going to sign the check, but in every single situation, you'll have at least three, at a minimum, influencers who are going to make that person want to write that check. Many a times you got to sell everybody else. And once they're sold, the signer of the check will just say, we good? We're good, and sign it off. Now, but each of those personas will have very different MOs, again, different motivations. So what I would like to ask is at the discovery phase is create an asset that's hits on very succinctly the value-based outcome for the generalized personas that you're just got a beetle on my mic. The generalized personas that you're talking to. So maybe there's a kind of technical person, and then there's a manager, and then there's an executive. So that's kind of three general ones. And then just make sure it's brief, be in, be out, right? It's high level. This is what the outcomes, and this is what we're solving for. So very elevator pitchy. Now, when you move into the demo phase, that to me is what, in theory, you're qualified you're basically saying this deal and this prospect is meaningful enough and has enough chance of success, over 50% chance of success, that we want to devote some time. So that's when I also like to do tweaks into what would be your companion to your demo, which is kind of your company pitch deck, the mission you're trying to solve, et cetera. And just making sure that you'll have a base pitch deck, typically, that your generic one, making sure, can you tweak the words and tweak how you deliver that, tweak some of the information to feel like this is not the first hospital system that you've sold to. That's not the first bank that you've sold to. Just make sure that you're using the language that speaks in their vernacular, right? If you're talking to a hospital system, for example, you're going to talk about patient outcomes, not about profit. You're going to talk about patient safety. You're talking manufacturing. You're not going to say bank branch, right? Kind of all those little minor things that make you really present like a domain expert in the industry of their client. And then I think lastly, the proposal stage, yes, you need a proposal that has money on the slides. But I think in front of that, your proposal deck should have a very specific, clear, visually to understand what is the value, quantification and qualitative metrics of the value that you bring, with some basic assumptions that are logical assumptions if you didn't actually get them from the client. And then so the first Thursday, this is the value we bring to you. This is how it solves a problem you have today. Second slide. Next slide is the numbers. And the last slide is, let me wrap it all together and why this is a good idea. And so to me, that's really what you're curating again from an assets, is you're going to provide some of that content, but can you kind of walk and get more specific in those assets as you drive along? So that's kind of what I think, kind of the 1.0, if you're just going down to the basics, what I would be asking for.
Now, you talked about the buying committee. How do you create assets that are specific for those particular personas in the buyer's committee, right? And deliver it in a way that is mindful and tactical, right? Because like what might be an asset that speaks to, especially in this world where we just don't have any ability to focus, right? And we're pretty distracted, right? Oftentimes, how do we deliver that? So again, like what might be valuable to a day-to-day user, or even maybe that middle manager, is completely irrelevant to maybe the
Yeah.
procurement stakeholder or a CFO who needs to like look over something, right? Any tips around delivering those,
Yeah.
again, those various assets?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jorge. I'm glad you asked that. So, getting back again a value-based methodology, the way that methodology works is you look at each persona that they have their own personal value, or effectively what matters to them. So, to me, I think of it very simply as, for each person you talk to, there's a personal "what's in it for me" aspect that you can play to, and then there's a "what's in it for the business," like the bigger aspect. So, for example, and your value statements need to align to that. So, for example, if I'm working with, let's say, a manager who very much wants to get promoted and needs to manage their team effectively, but wants to connect, and that's what their personal MO is that they want to do a good job. But the bigger is that they're trying to aid a company, top three priority in terms of a project and make that go well. You've got to be able to tie those two together for each persona, so that that person can know, this is why I'm going to work on this and why it means something to me, but also this is how I'm going to sell it upwards, which is that business attachment. Now, what I just asked for, if you're on the line and you're a marketer, you're like, what? You just told me, Kathleen, then now to create 5 different assets for each prospect, potentially, or for each persona in your campaign. Which I think, to me, that's why in talking to your co-founder, why once he started talking about the product, I was like, this is the cure-all. Because that's been the challenge, is how I've done it in the old days, is you have a general asset that's, again, like generic in nature, and I would just use my Audible to talk to it and to make those customizations. Because God help me, you don't want me changing a PDF. It's probably not going to look good. Or if I have the power to, PowerPoint, sorry for my old coworkers who thought I wasn't doing that, I would just tweak the slides. And probably wasn't looking awesome, but it was at least communicating what I wanted to know. And I know, but it would honestly, do you want a top seller spending their time making slides, or do you want them, doing research to prep for the meeting and what they're going to say? So it's not, I would do it because I needed to get the deal one done, but it's not really a great use of my time, and I'm arguably not the best person to do that. So that's why I think it will be really game changing to have products like Asset Mule out in the market helping, because in my mind, actually a great way to differentiate yourself in today's very competitive enterprise selling market is to show that you know the customer better than any other vendor. That alone will get you the deal, in my opinion. I've gotten meetings just on showcasing that with one or two intelligent questions that granted I didn't know the answer to, but the way I asked them made it clear that at least I understood what their business is. So that's kind of how I would say. So again, if you're listing on the line and you don't have Asset Mule, that's going to be a really hard thing to execute on. So do your best to at least get the big 2 or 3 personas settled and try to reuse it, but the more customized you can get, the better.
Awesome. Kathleen, thank you so much. This was so much fun. I very much had this moment in between the conversation. We were talking about in-person meetings. I had this like nostalgic moment. I was like, oh my gosh, I remember those days. And it seems like it was forever ago. But I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and insight. If folks wanted to learn more about the way you help organizations grow and scale their go-to-market, what are the best URLs to reach? I also wanted to highlight your podcast. Maybe you
Yeah.
can tell folks a little bit about that and where they can listen in.
Yeah, so very simply, honestly, sending me a LinkedIn message. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. Kathleen Lim Randall is best way to reach me. Now, my podcast is probably another way to kind of understand how I think about things, because I've got guests that we riff on very specific topics that really break down the specifics of being able to execute on, not just, hey, here's an ICP. Okay, well, how do I actually do this right? Like, how do I do this in a way that's going to make a difference and not just be a collegiate type of exercise. And so the go to market lab is what I call it. And I specifically called it because I believe that there's generally an art and a science of doing things. There's methodology for a reason, but you've got to also use your gut and your instinct and your creativity and how you approach go to market in general, especially in those category creating type of startups. So yeah, I would absolutely love. And at the end of the day, I love learning. So also feel free to reach out to me even if you don't have budget. I'm always happy to do a 30-minute, 1 hour call just to be able to give you some ideas and at least set you in the right direction, because that helps me, like you said, Jorge, have my own nostalgic moments, as it always reminds me of something, or I typically learn something from those conversations.
Awesome. Well, thank you so, so much again and have a great day.
Yeah, absolutely.